Let's talk about the biggest problem with Alchemy, the one I don't think they're ever going to find a way to get around, which has been highlighted recently by the rebalancing of Orcish Bowmasters and the One Ring. Welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so you don't miss out on any future videos like this. So we're going to talk about Alchemy and what the biggest problem is. What's happened recently, which you've probably seen because it's big news for Alchemy, is that there have been a rebalancing or a nerf to Orcish Bowmasters and the One Ring. So it's something that had to be done because it was absolutely dominating in Alchemy. I saw some stats that said it was up to like 80% the most commonly played deck, and it's basically pushing everything out. So the changes to Orcish Bowmasters are instead of when it enters the battlefield and when the opponent draws extra cards, you do a damage. It only does it when they draw the card. It takes away the ETB effect, so it no longer does that. So it's not now a removal spell against any one toughness creature, despite the opponent not drawing extra cards, because it could just be used for that. And then with the One Ring, it gives the protection from everything to your next turn. It's still the same cost to cast it, still 4, but its tap ability, where you can put a burden counter on the One Ring and then draw extra cards for each burden counter, it's not just tapping, it now costs 1 as well. So this is the old version here. I'm going to change them to the new one. If you just go to the deck and just change it to Alchemy, you'll now see the new versions. So, new version doesn't have ETB on Orcish Bowmasters, and on the One Ring, the ability at the bottom now requires 1 mana to tap, so it slows it down a bit. So the changes this makes to the deck, which is basically made up of just these, and then all kinds of other removal and strong black cards, it weakens this deck. It basically makes Orcish Bowmasters less effective at removing things, and especially when it could remove the opponent's Orcish Bowmasters, because it has 1 toughness, it means that this deck now is nowhere near as good as it was before. And one of the reasons why this deck was so popular is because the One Ring draws extra cards, and Sheoldred turns the life loss into life gain when you draw extra cards, and Orcish Bowmasters is the best defense against these two. These two being really popular means you need this to be able to do extra damage every time your opponent is drawing cards. But Orcish Bowmasters, like I said, entering the battlefield is the perfect counter to your opponent's Orcish Bowmasters because you could kill theirs with yours when it enters the battlefield. Not that I play much Alchemy, or hardly at all, to be honest, but this is what I've heard from other people that play Alchemy, is that this deck was just basically everywhere, and it meant that you either liked Alchemy because you liked playing this deck, or you hated Alchemy because you hated playing against this deck. It was just completely taking over. So, making this deck weaker gives a chance to other decks to actually have a chance to do something, because if 80% of the meta was just this deck against this deck most of the time, it doesn't make a very varied format. So having a greater number of decks in the meta is usually a sign that things are going well, and the format is healthy and interesting and enjoyable for people. If everything's basically just down to one deck that's dominating, it gets stale very quickly. So the problem with Alchemy isn't that it's had to do these rebalances to make this deck not as strong as it was before. The problem is what to do next when you make these rebalances. So when cards are banned in Standard, you'll get given a wild card to replace every copy that you had. This happened back when Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Invoke Despair, and Reckoner Bankbuster were all banned. If you had 4 copies of each in your collection, when it's banned in Standard, you will get 12 wild cards back that match the rarity of those cards, and then you can still use those cards in other formats, in Alchemy, Historic, Explorer, wherever they're still legal, you can still use them. You get the wild cards back because it's compensation for the fact that you can't play them in Standard anymore. But in Alchemy, you don't get anything. When Orcish Bowmasters is nerfed, is changed, rebalanced, you don't get 4 rare wildcards back, and with the One Ring, you don't get 4 mythic wildcards back. In fact, you just don't get anything at all. They're not as good anymore, but they're not completely banned from the format. So they're just taken down a step, and some people might say that they're no longer playable, but I mean they are still playable. They're just not as good, so you don't get anything for it. And you can kind of understand Alchemy players don't seem to be very happy about this, because they might have spent money on getting these cards, or at least their in-game resources. Either way, they've spent time or money getting these cards, adding them to your collection, being able to use them, and presumably enjoying playing with them. And now their deck's been messed with. These cards no longer do what they thought they did, or what they did when they first crafted them or paid for them. Now, different games handle this situation in different ways. I don't play Hearthstone, but I've heard from people that do play Hearthstone that they will give you back some kind of resource to help you craft something else if one of your cards has been rebalanced or changed. Let me know in the comments if you know exactly how that works, because to be honest, I haven't looked into it that much, but the exact way that they recompensate people isn't the point. The point is that they do it to some extent, which I'm very confident of. And then on the other end of the spectrum, with Marvel Snap, if you've played that before, you'll know that rebalances happen very, very often. And there's no compensation at all for when your cards get changed. And you could have spent money buying that specific card. Sometimes you'll see offers come up where you spend money directly on getting a card. And in Marvel Snap, decks are made up of just 12 different cards. So changing one of those cards can make a huge difference to how playable your favorite deck is. So that's kind of what we do in Alchemy. We don't give compensation for changing cards, but people kind of feel like they should, the way that Hearthstone does something to give back to people. But here's the thing, with Alchemy, it's designed to have regular changes. That's the premise of the format, to keep it fresh, to keep it evolving, to make sure that cards that are too strong get taken down a bit so they don't dominate, and cards that are so weak that they don't really see any play get elevated so that they have a bit more of a chance. And it should mean that things are more balanced and there are a greater variety of decks being played. Whether Alchemy players like it or not, when their favorite cards get nerfed, that is what they've signed up for. That's the deal with Alchemy. And if you play Alchemy, that's the deal you've accepted. If they did end up giving compensation in Alchemy when cards are rebalanced, then it could potentially be a lot of compensation they're giving out, a lot of free wildcards, because Alchemy balances happen a lot, or at least in theory, they should happen a lot more often than cards being banned in Standard, for example. So this is the main problem with Alchemy, as far as I can see it. Players expect some kind of compensation when things are changed, but if it happens that often, they're giving away way too much value. And compensation was never part of the deal with Alchemy. They never said we'll change things and keep giving you extra wildcards. They just said we'll change things to promise a balanced meta, not to promise integrity in the cards that you've crafted. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Wizards of the Coast should give out extra wildcards and things when Alchemy cards are rebalanced? Or do you think they've got it right at the moment with the fact that you just don't get anything back at all? This is the problem that I don't think Alchemy can get around. You're always going to have players complaining about the format they're playing because the deal they've signed up for they feel isn't fair if they don't benefit from it. Anyway, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching this video to the end. I'll see you in the next one.